Hey, welcome to our podcast, Happily Enriching You. This is Ayesha.
And this is Younus. This podcast is all about enabling self-discovery, igniting inner passions, and channeling happiness in you. Hey everyone, this is Younus here. Yeah, I know it feels like it's ages since we've had our last episode. What was supposed to be a small pit stop, I know has gone on for years. I have an interesting story and loads of lessons to follow in this podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Ayesha here. I'm sure you're all curious to know what made this unexpected pause so long. And I know that both Younus and I probably had a lot of expectations from ourselves and this podcast. And we want to share that with you here. So Younus, do you want to give everyone a little insight on that?
Oh yes. I think very few people, especially in a smaller circle, know this for a fact that we just started that ambitious project without having any gadgets. I remember having one small recorder, which we thought was decent enough. We procured one mic. We had another mic that we were trying our level best to manage with. And then we felt that we needed actual mics. So we went on to procure this mic that I'm currently using, which is called Pod Mic. And it all seemed right. We did what we had to do, which was just dive in without having a lot of expectations with respect to what we wanted to do. We were all learning on the go until one day when I was listening to my favorite podcast, and then by default, it happened to play our very own podcast. Only to realize that the audio quality was so low and so bad that I said to myself, wait 1 minute. This is not how it's supposed to be. I want our episodes, if not from a content point of view, at least from a production point of view, to be perfect. I know, Ayesha, you were there in that car that day. Did you feel the same way?
Hold on. I know you just spoke out loud what I was just thinking of, perfectionism, right? I think it's as positive as it sounds. It's also a big curse. And I think we are clearly, I would say, the victims of those. In the run to ensure that everything goes perfect in our podcast, I think just hearing us out loud, the very same day that you were mentioning about, gave us a clarity that there was so much more that we had to improve on.
Yeah, I know. I remember telling you that let's stop for a month. Hopefully we'll start sooner. And that's where the quest, I think, on YouTube started in terms of, do we have enough equipments or do we need to procure? I went on a hunt, if you remember, from Amazon to YouTube to back to Amazon and YouTube to figure out. And there was this massive cost that was coming. There was a cloud lifter that I needed, which we clearly had the money but did not want to commit to. And then I remember telling you that let's do one thing. Let's take a small sabbatical, at least from our podcast, till we either have the will and the allocated budget, which we can easily put across. I also remember how when I did get at least the 1 amp, the preamp that we needed, I said to myself that, wait 1 minute, we have one preamp, but what is the point? We need another. And then another cost came in. And then I said, wait 1 minute, the recorder that we have is not as good. So a hunt for the recorder happened. I'm in fact currently using a Zoom PodTrack 4, which I think is good enough. And I think more than Ayesha, because Ayesha has known, this psychological fever that I have for such a long time. This was a bottomless pit. Even though I know this frustrates her time and again, but I have learned my lesson, Ayesha. I know when it comes to perfectionism, it definitely sounds positive. I always wore that as a badge of honor. But now I know how it is, especially when a lot of people around say that you don't have to be, sitting in a posture which is perfect, lighting which is perfect, sound which is perfect. Sometimes it is just heart-to-heart natural conversation that actually matters the most. So I have a promise. The promise is that from here on, I am going to be that person who is going to be as natural, normal, not as perfect and sophisticated that I always at least wanted to sound.
Absolutely. I think a lesson that we've learned is to embrace our imperfections, celebrate those small wins, right? Because I remember how we thoroughly enjoyed recording the first few podcasts that we had. Very less of planning and a lot of spontaneity that went into it. And ironically, I think at that point we did know what were some of the areas that we were being, if I may say, imperfect. But I think that's what connected with a lot of our audiences, especially when we heard a lot of people coming back to us and saying, why aren't you, sharing a new podcast, and when is the next one coming out? I think it's at this point of time, what we aim to do is also set realistic expectations, right? So I'm sure that this is something that we'd be working on to find the right balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm fully aware of the fact that perfectionism has a cost. Often it is a hidden cost, isn't it? I think one major cost that I am going to learn from is the lost opportunity. Starting off so ambitiously, so excited, sitting, in fact, on chairs that we probably didn't fit in, wanting to seclude ourselves from as much traffic noise as possible, recording late nights just to make sure that there is that pin drop silence. All of that were actually exciting aspects of the podcast. But then I think I just wanted it to be perfect. And that perfect moment, that perfect version, obviously has a cost. We missed out on great conversations that we could have extended for weeks to come. And I think we would have had some good size podcast conversations, directions, visions, lessons that we never really took off with. So yeah, I am going to be more focused on the right connect and on the right impact.
Absolutely. And I think while we were aiming to have everything so perfect around us, it also took a great toll of us emotionally, right? While we did want to put ourselves out there, we did want to talk about so many different areas that we wanted to highlight. I think just these barriers restricted us a lot, which, I'm hoping that, of course, we're human and our listeners definitely will agree with it that, it's always better sooner rather than later that we're here back again.
So while I don't want this podcast just to be a confession and confession and confession, I'm sure our audience who are listening to this also can concur with one thing. It's not just me who suffers from it, but great many number of people who are also listening to this actually struggle with this. So can we have our focus of this podcast more a remedial rather than just a confession?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. So here is my first remedy. I think for me, it was always about being spotless, being perfect, being visually good, being audibly really, really nice. So here I am, embracing imperfections. This very room where we're sitting is not in the most ideal setup for us. I know that there are still probably vehicles who are passing by who I think are not going to give us the ideal, background rather. But then I am going to settle for it, embracing those imperfections as natural and as humane as possible, because with every error, with every stumble, I learn something new. And I promise that through these episodes, I will open up myself to learning those new things.
Absolutely. And I think another promise that we'd like to make is small or big progress is the key here, right? So what that, it took us a while to come back with our next podcast. Now that we are back, we are here to stay, and a small step is a victory each day. And we look forward to the next milestone.
And also, of course, to add to this list of remedies, before we could even get this podcast recording up and running, I remember there were these 3 or 4 failed attempts, and then there were 2 or 3 weeks where we said, no, not today, we will do it tomorrow. Before that, much before that, I was looking for an ideal host where I could host my podcast, look at options left, right, and center. And then I said to myself that, wait, hold on. Let me not pretend that we have suddenly lakhs of people who are going to be tuning in and listening to us. So I wanted to set realistic expectations because after all, it's all about the balance. Although I'm aiming higher, I want us to have as big an audience as possible, but I also recognize that it is ultimately celebrating those small milestones of starting this podcast and keeping it up and running is what is going to take us along, a long way.
And I think another area that will help us be a lot more present will be to recognize that, one, we shouldn't be too overcritical about ourselves. Two is that we're here to share. And I think that's what's most important. And we genuinely want to redirect all our thoughts in the right direction and have our listeners be as connected as they were with us back then.
And coincidentally, what I was shying away, to be honest, Ayesha, is not that I wanted things to be perfect. I was in fact shying away from that very same thing that you spoke of, that is feedback. I was scared where somebody would come to my face and tell me that, hey, 1 minute, what is this garbage that you are putting out? We can't even hear you clearly. Your audio is not really good. What kind of mics do you even use? But truth be told, when I made a few of our very own friends listen to some of our old podcasts, they said, what is wrong with you? It's perfect. Why did you even stop? And that actually made me stop and think that, why was I even so critical with my own self with respect to feedback? All I had to do was just go to our listeners and ask them, and I'm so damn sure they would have told us, maybe to work here and there, but none of them would have told, you have no right to put these episodes, you need to stop. So here is another confession. I am going to be mindful. I am going to be mindful to make sure that every time we sit, we will be in this present moment. As easy as it is for me to be overly critical about what we are doing, but I want to gently redirect our thoughts to what best can we do with each episode. How does that sound, Ayesha?
Perfect. In fact, that's a brilliant plan.
In fact, during our entire break, I have to be honest that my perfectionist tendencies have had more costing me more than anybody else. That is why it's important for me to realize that waiting for that perfect episode and denying our listeners of even the smallest of joy of listening to us, connect with them, talk on topics that matter the most was certainly not worth it.
So our aim now is?
Our aim now is to deliver as much value as imperfectly as possible, because ultimately in those imperfections we will have our audience see authenticity.
Absolutely.
So I think all our episodes from here on are going to ultimately come from the heart.
Absolutely.
That's why chasing perfectionism was exhausting. Ideally, if you look more closely, it is a never-ending race. We can never win over it. That's one of the reasons why the focus should be on progress. It should be on growth. It should be on authentic experiences.
Well, we're beyond grateful for all your patience and supports, dear listeners. And as we restart this podcast journey, I think both Younus and I, we only want you to remember one thing, that we're all in it together. We're here to learn, we're here to evolve, and of course, support each other.